Right, so last year, so back in January 22, I decided that I was going to upgrade my Olympus EM1 to the Olympus EM1 Mk2 here. And I've had this camera now for about 12 months, so I feel like that's enough time for me to offer my thoughts between these two cameras. And if you've been watching my channel for a while now, you'll know that in that time, I also bought the Fujifilm X-H1 from August 22 to August 23 last year. So I can certainly draw some conclusions when I'm comparing my thoughts, dislikes about the E-M1 Mk2 with that camera as well, and why I sit here today thinking about whether I'm going to be moving the Mk2 Olympus EM1 along in order for me to maybe delve into a more modern full frame camera for the first time. Because whilst there is a lot of improvements to the EM1 Mk2 Olympus compared to the Mk1, which I'll go into detail a little bit more in a minute, but I'm not quite sure there's enough there for me to want to keep hold of this camera, because where it doesn't do well, I'm hoping the full frame camera that I do buy down the line will fulfill a lot of what I'm looking for in a camera at the present time. I think one of the big things that I'm not so keen about with this camera, and it's probably my own fault because I did briefly have the E-M5 Mk3 camera, which was a smaller version of this one basically in a plastic body. Well, that's what I assumed it was, but when I've looked recently at the noise performance of the E-M1 Mk2 and the E-M5 Mk3, actually that smaller or newer camera actually handles noise a lot better, and that's one of the main reasons why I've been looking at full frame cameras recently, because I just feel that in lower light, when you need to bump up the ISO to get a faster shutter speed to say freeze a dog running towards you, I do struggle with the images that this particular camera affords me. And yeah, and the noise can be a little bit ugly and hard to deal with. Yes, you can use great programs like DxO's Pure Raw and Adobe's own denoise functionality now, as well as Topaz denoise, to help get rid of some of that noise. I do find that if you push those tools too hard, it does take a lot of the sharpness out of your images, and it can add some annoying and ugly artifacts into your images. I'm still of the ilk that I want to get it right first time in the camera first, the exposure, the sharpness, the noise levels, so that when I do come to edit them in post, they don't really need a lot doing to them. Hence why I'm now looking at full frame cameras, which will give me sufficient continuous autofocus abilities, as well as producing a cleaner image at high ISOs. I know the compromise in that is going to be bigger bodies, heavier glass, but I think I'm at the stage in my photography with my clear needs, that what I need a camera to deliver for me, that maybe a sacrifice in size and weight is just something I'm going to have to live with if I want the benefits that come along with full frame cameras. So I was looking briefly at getting another Fujifilm camera, but I just don't think I can live with the mushy greens that those X-Trans sensors seem to deliver. And certainly from my experience, you seem to have to do a lot of editing to get the images how you want them to look. So I think Fujifilm is certainly off the radar for me for a while, and I'm certainly going to be comparing the full frame camera that I do end up buying with the Fujifilm X-E1 that I've got and the excellent 35mm f1.4, because if I can get a similar kind of look from the full frame camera, then I'm probably going to sell up all my Fujifilm gear. Likewise, I recently bought the Sony A7S to see what my manual focus lenses look like on a full frame body, and equally if the Panasonic does a similar job, then I probably will sell the Sony A7S as well, because I'm certainly looking forward to this year to just rationalizing some of my gear, because over the last few years I've just bought so much gear that I just can't use it all the time, and it's just taking up so much space in the house. So it'll be nice to get down to a couple digital cameras, and then as well I'll start looking into my film cameras as well, and do I need 10 or 11 film cameras that I currently are running with. So anyway, that's currently my current thoughts on where I am with getting a newer, more modern full frame camera, and some of the reasons why, even though there is definitely some improvements in the Olympus E-M1 Mk2 compared to my original E-M1 Mk1, is not enough to keep me within the Micro Four Thirds system at present. So let's briefly just talk about what they've changed in this E-M1 Mk2. Admittedly, this camera was released back in 2016, so it is getting on a little bit now, but that is nothing compared to what the E-M1 Mk1 is in terms of age, which was released 10 years ago last year, so that's getting on a little bit now as well. But anyway, so between the Mk1 and the Mk2, they increased the resolution from 16 megapixels to 20 megapixels, so that obviously helps a little bit in terms of cropping. So the E-M1 Mk1 here, you can only tilt it in this direction here, so which I do generally prefer for photography, because it's easy to see subjects from your waist level when you're doing photography, and equally you can get down really low to shoot, because obviously on the Mk2 you have a full articulating screen, which is obviously great for like vlogging with, and you can still use it for low shots, certainly in the vertical plane like that, and that's great for dogs running towards you. But then you are still limited to the vertical format, whereas the good thing with a tilted screen is you can then use the landscape orientation for those more action shots and have more in the frame. So yeah, there's definitely pros and cons for tilting and articulating screens, and that's why I like the Fuji system so much, because they've got that excellent three-way tilt. If I was in the Sony ecosystem, I'd be really interested in picking up their latest A7 V, because it's another variation of a type of tilting and fully articulating, in that you can tilt it like the E-M1 Mk1, where you can just like a normal standard tilt, and you can also articulate it right around as well for video. So the best of both worlds. But anyway, back to the E-M1 Mk2. So obviously from the E-M1 Mk1, the resolution changed, the articulating screen changed. Day-to-day use, I don't really see much difference in the EVF or the handling. I was a little bit worried initially, because I think it's about another 100 grams heavier, this body, compared to the E-M1 Mk1. But like the E-M1 Mk1, the ergonomics just really work for this camera, and you don't really notice that extra weight at all. And I just do love the feel of these Olympus cameras. The other big benefit for me, like I've touched on, between the Mk2 and the Mk1 variant, is I do find the continuous autofocus to be a lot better. Like obviously I've taken probably thousands of shots of my dog over the last 12 months, and the hit rate with my E-M1 Mk1 was just so frustratingly slow. Like the Fujifilm X-H1 did a better job in that regard, and then when I picked up the E-M1 Mk2, this does better again, just not when the light is a little bit low, and then like I said, you need to up the ISO, and that's when you start to get some really ugly noise into your image, even at ISO 6400, which full frames cameras can handle a lot better. So yeah, so continuous autofocus is definitely better. In terms of single autofocus, I never really noticed any problems with my Olympus E-M1 Mk1, and I continue to use it to this day with no issues. I think in terms of image quality, there's not really that much between the Mk1 and the Mk2. I certainly think it lower ISOs, so what I'm talking about lower ISOs here, so 800, 1200, those range 3200, they're definitely better in the Mark II variant, but lower down the scale, there's not really much difference between these two cameras. And yeah, I'd probably say the tonality overall is slightly better with the E-M1 Mark II, but I've got to say, most of my favorite images that I've captured over the last 4 or 5 years have been with that first generation Olympus E-M1. So I've got no real issues with the way that it renders a scene. The other big benefit of the Mark II version of the Olympus E-M1 is the battery life. There's a massive battery in the Mark II variants compared to the Mark I variant, and it just goes on and on and on. It just lasts so much longer. I feel confident just going out on a shoot and just taking one battery these days, knowing fairly confidently that that'll be enough, and it'll probably do the next shoot as well. It just pales into comparison how much difference that makes, because from my Olympus E-M1 Mark I, I've probably got about 4 batteries, and when I go out on a shoot, I make sure I take them all. But admittedly, only one of them is an OEM, so the others are probably not as good, but I still feel more confident when I've got more than one battery with me when using the Olympus E-M1 Mark I. So when I was looking at upgrading my E-M1 Mark I, I did obviously look at the Mark III variant of the E-M1 Mark III, but I didn't really see that there was much more to gain with getting that camera for my particular needs, so that's why I stuck with the Mark II variant. And don't get me wrong, it's been a great camera. I just sometimes wish the continuous autofocus and the low light performance was better. So over the original Olympus, this also has a high res mode. Admittedly, it's got to be on a tripod, and it's also got some pro capture modes in that you can literally take a picture, and when you press the shutter, before you press it all the way, the camera already starts taking pictures, so that you can capture that critical moment, for instance when a bird takes off, or in any scenario where fast-paced action is taking place. And whilst I have tried pro capture, because I'm not generally into wildlife or bird photography yet, I haven't really found many scenarios where that's useful for me, and it just takes so many images that it takes ages to sort through them as well. When I generally find, certainly for my needs with a dog running towards me, normally the moment you want to capture is after the dog has started running, so I don't necessarily need to capture the bit before, because the bit I need will more likely be within the burst that I do try to capture. So yeah, so I haven't really used the pro capture mode. And obviously as well, the Mark I, even though it doesn't have the same frame rates, it does have quite high burst rates, so that if you can anticipate where like your subject's going to run through, you can obviously use single autofocus with burst mode to try and capture that. That normally does work in some situations. Certainly if you're shooting like a dog agility competition, and you know the dog's got to come over a particular jump, that's still useful to focus in on the jump, make sure there's enough depth of field, and then just burst away. And you can do that with practically any camera. I've even done it with the Canon 5D, and you do get some good hit rates, but it is nice sometimes just to have a camera that will do that tracking of a subject a lot more confidently and a lot better tracking than these Olympus cameras have, so that when you do use the burst mode and start firing away, you know that you're going to get quite a high number of keepers. And that's probably where this suffers. Like most of the time I'm using like a spray and pray kind of technique, where I just use very high speed bursts, and I know there'll be some keepers in that, but then it's obviously, it takes a while to sort through the images and decide which ones offer you the best look that you were going for. And the high res mode, I haven't really tried it, to be honest. One thing that I did notice an improvement with, and I was hoping it would be better again still, is I've still got quite a few old 4/3 lenses for the Olympus system. So I've got the excellent 50mm f2 macro, and then I've also got the 50-200 f2.8 to f3.5 lens, and I love using those lenses for macro and for landscape photography, and I was kind of hoping the performance would have been good enough on the newer Olympus to be able to use certainly the 50 to 200 for basically tracking my dog running and yeah, nailing some good images with that. But I just haven't really had the success rate that I was hoping for in that regard. So I think even if I opted for the OM1, I'm not sure whether those OLED lenses are going to give me what I want. So that's kind of where I am at the moment with Micro Four Thirds. I would have to invest in probably some of the more native lenses to get the results that I'm looking for, and then I could equally just invest in another system to give that a go. So yeah, that's where I am at the moment. Yeah, so obviously when I had the E-M1 Mk2, I was also looking to see whether it would replace the Osmo Pocket for my video in camera needs. And I did some low light tests, which I'll put up now, because I do find that the Osmo Pocket that I'm filming this on now, even though it's a great camera, it doesn't do that well in lower light. And obviously the Micro Four Thirds cameras have a slightly larger sensor, so I was hoping that the performance on the E-M1 Mk2 would be just as good. But like, I'm happy with the Osmo Pocket for 90% of the time. So in the end, I'm not going to keep the E-M1 Mk2 just for some videoing needs. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, which is something I really do enjoy with the E-M1 Mk2, is that on the original Mk1, on the PASM dial here, you haven't got any custom selections. You've got what called My Sets in this camera. So what you can do is you can save 4 custom settings to these My Sets, and then when you're in a particular selection, so whether you're in aperture priority, shutter priority, manual, you can recall those My Sets to any of those positions. So it takes a few clicks, but you can literally pull forward your like wildlife or dog shooting settings into a mode, and then you can do another couple selections and get back to just your normal general photography shooting settings. It does work, but obviously with the E-M1 Mk2 here, you've got dedicated C1, C2 and C3 selections on your mode dial. So once you've got it all set up, you can just quickly go from like general photography, C1, to C2, shooting on a tripod, so no IBIS, etc. Or you can go straight to C3, which is then your setup for shooting your fast action. So I really did like the change that Olympus did with the way that you select custom modes with their cameras. And I did briefly consider going back to Fuji, because I do like the quality sometimes of the images that did come out of the Fujifilm X-H1, but of course that had a 24 meg sensor compared to the 20 meg sensor of the E-M1 Mk2. That's another thing that OM Digital Systems haven't really approved on. Like, this camera came out in 2016, it's got a 20 meg sensor. The rumored OM1 Mk2 in 2024 still has a 20 meg sensor, whereas at least Panasonic with their G9 Mark II have gone up to 25 meg. So at least they are trying to push the bounds and give something to other photographers other than those that just shoot wildlife and birds in flight, which I feel is where Olympus really is solely focusing on at the present time. And I do get it. They do offer some real benefits, certainly in terms of weight and the AI subject detection modes that the OM1 does offer those photographers. But just for me, who's maybe an occasional wildlife biff, but mainly landscapes and street photography, the OM1 doesn't really offer much more than my Olympus E-M1 Mk2. Hence why now, for me, I feel that full frame for those kind of shots might be the way forward, or it's certainly worth trying now that the bodies and the lenses to some degree have come down in price and weight. So I think that's all I wanted to say in this video. As always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.